everyone, my name is Dessa, aka Writing from the Shadows.
And I am Rika, aka Vestigial Claws.
And welcome to
Work in Progress!
If you are watching the video version of this podcast, you may have noticed that, like last time, there is no video, and it's just a lovely picture with the episode title. That's because, once again, we're in a really busy season for both of us. It's just easier to get the podcast out when it's audio. But there is going to be more video podcasts. We're just in audio right now.
We promise one of these days you will see our faces again.
Yeah, or maybe you won't, and you'll just have to imagine them for the rest of the podcast. Who knows?
I mean, that would actually be kind of great. We could look like anything.
Yeah.
Anyone.
All right. So this week, Rika read Chapter 8 of Where Your Loyalties Lie. So let's just hop right into it.
All right, so I finally, 7 episodes in, I've kind of figured out a little bit of format, finally.
We're on episode 6.
Episode 6, 6 episodes in. Wait, did we have 2 doubleheader chapters?
We did.
We must have, yeah, we did. Wow, 6 episodes in. I can count. So anyways, first, a little bit of summary on Chapter 8. Basically, we're getting more Dazai-Chuya cooperation. We're getting the first, they have a restaurant mission, but Chuya was very unaware that they were walking into a mission there, so This is kind of the first time that Dazai sort of laid it out and was like, yeah, we're going into this mission. We're not having backup. Yeah. And I'm telling you that because I respect you as my husband.
Yeah.
And that's where we currently are with Dazai and Chuya. So, breaking it down a little bit, there's just a few points of things that I noticed. Some of them are going to be questions, some are just going to be comments, because there were some noticings. The first one, I just think it's cute that Dazai is now venting to Chuya about work. I always really appreciate relationships written with the little details of the mundane. I just find it to be really, really adorable, and the fact that they have that banter, and also that Dazai is kind of falling into that role, and Chuya's falling into that role for Dazai, it's just cute.
Yeah.
It makes me happy.
Yeah, I don't write this domestic stuff that often, so it's they're husbands. I'm going to write some domestic stuff in here.
You're writing some excellent domestic stuff, which is really funny given that this was kind of an arranged marriage AU here, so we weren't really... in terms of domestic relationships where you could get away with not writing domesticity, this is one of them.
Yeah.
So, did you enjoy writing them being adorable and domestic and starting to get into the rhythm of each other?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite things about Sokoku just anywhere is the banter and the way they interact with each other and just the resigned exasperation they have on both sides. So whenever I read a Sokoku fic, I'm like, what is the quickest way to reach that point?
The quickest path to banter. And apparently it's marriage.
Yeah.
That's actually kind of on here too, of just we see through the banter that not only are they getting kind of comfortable, they're using it to sort of feel each other out, and Chuya specifically is sort of getting a sense of how much he can push Dazai through the banter. Dazai's reputation is very mysterious and very bloodstained, and here Chuya is going and kind of cracking jokes with the banter back at him, and Dazai's reactions or lack thereof are kind of what Chuya seems to be basing a lot of his read of Dazai on, and that's really interesting to me, namely for a little exchange where Dazai's going, you're my subordinate, and Chuya's like, that's funny, eat shit. And it's a very interesting thing to see, given that they at first came from this stance where Dazai was a very mysterious figure to Chuya, and his reputation was as a very inhuman figure. And we actually see that towards this chapter. We see why that reputation is in place. But before that, we get to see a little bit of a humanized Dazai.
Yeah.
So talk about that.
I've never been someone that likes writing Dazai as the perfect, infallible character that we see a lot in canon. I just, even though his ability thing is no longer human and there's everyone's you're not a real person, he's a person. Especially if you're writing a story where he's not some sort of not person. I wrote a fic, it was a commission where he was Arahabaki, which is that's a different story. But when he's not a god, Dazai's human, and I like humanizing him whenever possible. And so when we got that tidbit last chapter or the chapter before that about the fact that Mori's holding something over his head. And so just from my opinion, when we look at canon Dazai, I think that Canon Dazai is also a human being, and it's just a matter of how much humanity do you see. How close to Dazai can you get? How constant do you get to be around him so, the mask can't survive as long? So it's really a sense of proximity and pushing. And so you have Chuya living in his flat and pushing, so we get to see more of the humanity.
So it would be fair to say that Dazais have layers.
Yes. They're like an onion, yes.
Thanks for answering that question. Okay, so we actually, this is a point that, so I do my points, basically I kind of write them down as I'm reading, and then I sort of go back through and look at them, and this is one that we actually sort of answered a little bit later on, but I'm still going to bring it up, and I'm still going to ask for your take on it.
Okay.
Because on Dazai's planning, in your opinion, does he actually pre-plan a lot of his things and is just kind of lying about not going in with plans, or is he just an intensely adaptive person? Because those are two very different skill sets, and I have my own suspicions, and at the end of this chapter, we saw things that kind of confirmed the camp I'm sort of in. But in general, which would you say describes Dazai more?
My answer is neither. They're not mutually exclusive. I think it's circumstantial and situational. So in this situation, what Dazai is working with right now is a lack of information, and you can't really come up with a really good plan if you don't know what's going on. And so in that instance, Dazai kind of has to be off the cuff, and he's able to think on his feet. He's very quick and that sort of thing in the moment. So that's something that he can succeed at. But if he had the information to be like, this is exactly what we're going to expect, he would have planned it out. So it's really just based on what is he working with.
And that makes perfect sense, and is probably a very human way of characterizing that. I think that a lot of fiction can sometimes fall into the trap of we have to establish the character as having really solid and consistent personality things about them. But that's also kind of not how people work. Like, people waffle. People do different things in different situations. And so that's something that I think you've brought to your Dazai that we actually don't see a ton of in canon Dazai. Yeah, can you talk a little bit about the, essentially the unpredictability of writing people as opposed to building characters? Because we have talked about your character building process and that you write people.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the biggest thing at the fundament and at the core of almost every person you will ever meet, with the exception of people that have developmental disorders or that sort of thing, is that emotion at the end of the day almost always wins out. So you can have the most logical person, you can have someone that knows that this is not the right choice, but if they have enough emotion with the whatever's going on the problem, they will act on emotion rather than reason. And so when it comes to writing a character like Dazai, even if Dazai is someone that's very logical and almost never, if ever, reacts from emotion, he's living in a world where everyone else does. And so even if he's planning things out to the T, at the end of the day, you can't always predict how emotionally invested someone will be in one of their choices. And so that's where you get some variability and unpredictability, where which is why I think he can also think on his feet. And I think that a lot of people, when they are doing their characterizations, the human response comes secondary to the direction of the story. And so if your character may possibly, their gut reaction is something that does not serve your overall overarching purpose, there is a little bit like author interference of like, I want you to act this way. And when it comes to characterization, I think the big difference between someone that's doing very, very good characterization and someone that's doing good characterization or like replacement level characterization is whether or not you let the character make that human emotional response and adapt to it versus whether you force them to go the way you wanted them to go.
Which is kind of where we get the out-of-character actions, and also where I think we get some of the sticking too solidly to canon. Like, I think we see it both in the canon property itself. I really don't think that anyone will argue that Asagiri has developed most of his characters beyond their tropes.
Oh, you'd be surprised. I get into those arguments a lot. Not
Look,
anymore,
I haven't
but
been
I
on
used
public
to.
Twitter in a while.
Yeah.
So
I stopped saying anything about it, but people would really argue with me. They're like, you have to trust Asagiri. And when it comes to like fan fiction in that sense, I think the reason people in the fandom are just so divisive around characterization, a lot of these characters, is that they're, in order to characterize someone that is not a person, so if we're looking at, say, a Dazai who's kind of just infallible, or if we're looking at a Higuchi who doesn't get like any development in canon, you need the person picking up that character needs to be aware that the character they're picking up is not fully developed. And that's not always the case, because if you don't have experience writing characters, if you don't have experience working with someone else's characters, you may go, this is the format, and because I like this character, that means the format is correct and it works and I don't have to adjust it, which is not always true.
And I can definitely see where that comes into play, especially in cases of the outside world is kind of acting on these characters. The characters are experiencing things. And then I think sometimes where I've seen both fanfiction and the canon property, specifically from Go for Stray Dogs, fall very short is that the characters only react short term to their environment. They don't have long-term repercussions.
Yeah.
And it's something that it feels like sometimes the writing is what happens to the characters slips off of them, and that's not how people work. So that is a very interesting way to think of characterization and characterizing, and the like taking a back seat and letting your character have enough development to run with their action and still work it into your story, as opposed to forcing them either out of character or forcing them out of development because you're too committed to an underdeveloped canon property.
Yeah, and I really like the way you phrase that, out of character versus out of development, which I think is a discussion that probably we could spend a couple of hours going on about. And
I would actually love to chat about that.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about it, and I really like the way you worded that, because there are situations where someone is not out of character, but the story falls a little flat because you missed a development opportunity.
Yeah. And it's something that, I mean, I think that in real life, people respond to their environments. They respond to what happens around and to them. And so when you miss that in fiction for the sake of keeping like a core character trait or quirk intact, you kind of, you miss humanizing the character.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people can be scared that it can bring the character into unrecognizability. And so, oh God, I would really love to chat about this more, actually.
Yeah,
because of the development.
I hate that we're totally going on a tangent, but I have one more thing to say, and that's about, gosh, wait, did I just forget it? No. What was the last thing you just said? Humanizing the character.
Humanizing the character, not preventing their development.
I think it was from before that. I don't know. I lost it. It's a shame, but if we come back to this topic in the future, I will probably remember it. So we'll stick a pin in that, a little cliffhanger.
That sounds fantastic. And speaking of cliffhangers, you leave a lot of them.
I know.
Speaking of other things you leave a lot of, you have this way of, and again, I know that you did a lot of research for this. I also know that you have a lot of specialized political knowledge base. So another thing that you kind of left around were the insinuations that you know a lot about buying off representatives. But what I specifically want to ask about there is, I mean, first of all, did Dazai interfere in our elections? I'm kidding. My real question on that is this a knowledge base that you actually have the specialized knowledge of, or is it a little author trick of you using kind of the way you word things and the way you fill the space of the conversation to imply that the characters are more knowledgeable than you are about a subject?
I mean, I've never bribed a politician, so I don't have first-hand experience with that. But I did work in politics, and when I was working in politics, one thing I did was I sat in a lot of meetings with lobbyists. So I'm familiar with kind of that sit down, speak with someone who wants you to do a particular thing, how they word it, how they work it. And then I just enjoy watching things that are very heavy on the political side. And I don't remember what media I consumed that kind of made me go, oh yes, when we're buying off, you know what it was? It's not buying off representatives, it was whips. And so for anyone that's not familiar with the United States political system in particular, when it goes to Congress, so we have the two houses of Congress, House of Representatives, and the Senate, and in each house you have the, what am I looking for? The Speaker of the House, which is Nancy Pelosi, and then you have the Senate Speaker, And these people are representative of the majority party. So if a Republican has a majority in the House, the Speaker of the House is going to be a Republican. However, the party that doesn't have the majority still has an organization structure, and through that there are whips who are, like, they're called whips because they're supposed to be getting the party into line. And so it's their job when it comes to, like, somebody sponsoring a bill and they're like, okay, I need you to go speak to X, Y, and Z representatives, and then you come back, what did they say? This person said no. Okay, that's a no. Now we need to pull a maybe and see if we can convince them that way. So that's how bills get passed. And so by that logic, if that's how you're trying to pass a bill, someone can use that logic backwards and try to end a bill by going, we need to move this person into a no.
I feel like I just learned so much about how lobbying works right now. Like, I had just, like, a basic sort of sketchy idea of, I know the general concept of lobbying, and now I think that I could, like, kind of articulate pretty well.
Well, whips are not lobbyists, so those are party members.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
So lobbyists are, like, outside, which they would also likely be keeping track of the yes and the no and maybe votes because they're public.
Very special interest.
Yeah, they're public knowledge, how people vote, so.
That makes a ton of sense. It's delightful to me. I was really excited to ask you if you'd ever run a politician.
Yeah, it's something, for anyone that doesn't know, my degree is actually in political science, which is something I feel like is pretty noticeable in my long chapter fix, because it's just whenever there's a chance to talk politics, I'm going all in.
And it's really, really excellent. Also, by the way, it makes living with Dessa during election season incredibly pleasant because she cuts right through all of the bullshit. It's very, very pleasant. All right, so, little point here. I don't trust Shohei, but also I'm a suspicious reader. And I'm also an author who is very fond of a good red herring. So my mistrust of Shohei is purely because the narrative is putting him in a position of, this dude something is wrong about him. But because of the obviousness of it, I'm struggling with making that a legitimate prediction of mine. Can you tell me about your feelings on red herrings? And on, like, twisty plots in general.
I mean, I feel like it's been well established that I like surprising my readers. But there's a lot of different ways to pull off a surprise.
There sure are.
So I think there's, like, it's interesting because I think one mark of good writing is being able to predict things to a degree. Like, there's times when things are completely unpredictable just because they're out of character, they make no sense, or there was no setup or anything, no foreshadowing. So when things are a surprise in that sense, that's not good writing.
Yeah.
So a surprise for the sake of surprise isn't necessarily good writing. But good writing is something where you can follow the progression of these surprises. I would then say that better writing is when you are surprised, but after the surprise is revealed, you can go back and see where the hints were.
I can agree wholeheartedly with that. Which is, I think, why I've been trying to base a lot of my predictions out of just, like, tiny things that I've been taking from this text. Speaking of tiny things taken from this text, I just have to give a quick note of appreciation for the shout out to the Dazai Hand Kink Nation. Bless. And this is a question that might actually get the shit beaten out of me from across this table. This might. Oh, God.
Okay.
So, we know that someone in the Bungo Stray Dogs official art team here really likes a certain part of anatomy.
Yeah.
We don't seem to be focusing on that certain part. Can we do a quick compare and contrast of the Dazai Hand Kink via the Atsushi foot kink we got going on in canon?
You know, it's really interesting with BSD, because there are a lot of feet, there's a lot of foot art,
sorry.
which is really, well, you know, it's something that's, every time they release one that's, like, just the feet are in focus, I'm like, this is so weird, because that's not normal when it comes to official arts for a series. It's, like, very, very rare that you see people barefoot, like, BTS's new song, they're barefoot, and that's, like, a big thing. I'm rewatching Doctor Who, and there's an episode where he takes off his shoes, and it's, like, this big thing, because when you see people, they're supposed to be wearing shoes. Unless you're inside their house or something.
There's just some does not compete.
Yeah, so it's, like, when people are drawn, like, completely dressed up, and they're not wearing shoes, like, that's very noticeable.
It's very uncanny valley.
Yeah, so I don't know what the VSD official art team is doing. I don't know if they're just like feet are easier to draw than hands. I have no idea. I don't have an answer.
There's some very detailed foot in there, but I really respect that you got into some very detailed, how lovely are Dazai's hands. That's what we deserve.
Honestly, where was that? Where was I talking about?
You mentioned his hands being beautiful and Chuya having his eyes on his hands like twice in
Really?
here. Yeah. Oh
Okay.
yeah.
Because one thing I did want to point out was like, I went on this tangent on Twitter before this chapter came out. I was like, you know what? I'm always talking in my fics. Dazai is always talking about how pretty Chuya is, but you know what? Dazai is also really pretty, and I hate it about him. Yeah. So I'm like, this fic, we're gonna get more Chuya thinking about how pretty Dazai is, and that's why it's there.
Well, it has absolutely come across, and I really enjoy Chuya's area of focus.
Yeah, because it's like, that's a big part of fics you read. Is Dazai's always like, wow, Chuya's so attractive, and I'm like, hold up. So is Dazai. Literally. Why do we never get that section of the story?
This house, I mean, we routinely get very, very angry in this household about how pretty Dazai is.
Yes, so, I hate him.
Yeah, fuck that man. He's the worst. Get him out of here. So, okay. So speaking of plot twists, we actually saw a really nice one in this chapter of Chuya and Dazai. They go on their little mission-y. Mm-hmm. They hunt their courier dude down. We're like, yeah, this is definitely the guy. Yeah. Which, by the way, was a fantastic scene of establishing exactly how morally gray these characters are.
Thank you.
I'm going to circle back and ask you to discuss it a little bit later because I'm mean, I like that. But in terms of a plot twist, that was just a really satisfying one. It was, can you just talk about the whys and hows of you constructing that? Because like we just touched on the fact that it's very unsavory to have plot twists that are basically the writers going, my audience figured it out and I need to be clever. This is not Moffat era Doctor Who. Yeah. Or Moffat era Sherlock. I'm sorry, I love BBC Sherlock, I do. But
but it went down the rails pretty quickly.
But it's like that, and that was one of the main complaints with the writing, was that it started to become a thing of they wanted so badly to be more clever than the audience that things stopped making sense. But that plot twist didn't carry that. It was very satisfying and it was very logical. So talk about the process a little bit.
Well, I think really the primary reason for such a plot twist is that the Ghost organization is dangerous, and they were dangerous enough to end a generations-long feud. And so, in that vein, this Ghost organization should be able to outmaneuver both organizations, and they have ways of doing that. So it's just a logical progression that they can trick Dazai and Chuya, because they have more information and they're like piecing together information. It's been something that's discussed a lot, and so that's why in the setup of this chapter we get a lot of the like, yeah, we don't really know what's going on, and I like have been combing through for hours and I think I found this little tiny snippet. And so because we're already coming from a place of I think this is right as opposed to this is absolutely what's going on, the fact that they're wrong is more believable.
That was a very, very good breakdown, and now I think that I understand why that was as satisfying as it was, because, that is the absolute logical progression of events right there. Yeah. And it's, narrative-wise, it's done where it's reinforced in a way that's, like, it's subtle and it's organic, and so it made the plot twist very believable. Yeah. It wasn't coming out of nowhere that this organization had these resources and that this organization was already steps ahead.
Yeah, and then another aspect of it is we have these two organizations that have been in control of Yokohama forever that are very much controlled by ability users. So in order for this third group to go toe-to-toe with them, they have to have some good ability users under their belt.
And we've established that by way of shapeshifting, by the way, my favorite.
Yes, Nellie Bly, another OC from Illustrations of Lying that came back for a quick cameo.
Oh, gosh. Speaking of cameos, I'm jumping ahead a few points here, but time is fake, so fuck it.
That's fair.
Did you kill Ongo at the end of this chapter?
I did not kill Ongo at the end of this chapter. No.
I thought that I had that nailed.
I did describe him like Ango. I don't know why. I didn't have a reason
Yeah,
for that.
you
I was like,
did.
you know what? Yeah, let's just give this dude some circle glasses. Maybe it was like me just like vicariously living through the concept of having killed Ango.
You described Ongo, you described him as a rat. I was like, all right, this is most definitely Ongo, and
Yeah.
it's not Ongo, so.
I think maybe at the time I was trying to make people think it was Ongo. I don't know. I think I just was like, who are we killing? Let's go with an Ongo-like person.
An Ongo-like person.
I'm like, if we're gonna kill anyone for no reason, let's make him look like Ongo.
Oh my gosh. Poor Ongo Sakaguchi. What did he ever do to deserve this
Betrayal.
Just kidding.
This house doesn't. We
This
don't
house-
fuck with traitors.
Yeah, no. This house is not about getting an Ongo there.
Yeah. So that means I also don't like Tachihara. Sorry, Tachihara stands.
Yeah, that's
This was
valid.
written before I knew, but
Yeah. Yeah, ditto on Tachihara. Sorry. Let's see. So, this is a point that was kind of just interesting to me. There's a line in this chapter about, finally we get, like, the line about Dazai being a suicidal bastard, which kind of just kicked it into my brain that your Dazai in this fic is far less overtly suicidal than canon Dazai. Please talk about that.
I mean, it's on purpose. There are reasons behind it which will be revealed further into the story, so I can't get too much into it. But I think we've discussed this before. The first time I watched BSD, I did not finish the first episode just because I was uncomfortable with how much of a joke the suicidal tendencies were taken as. And it's something that I've mentioned on my Twitter in terms of, like, I totally get the way Dazai deals with them. And why he's so lighthearted. I'm like, that totally tracks for me. It's like, I don't care for the way that every other character in this verse also is so dismissive about it. Because that's just bullshit for me. As in, like, even when you're, like, joking and we're millennials and we have, like, this casual nihilism and people are just, like, jokingly depressed all the time, you still kind of go, are you okay, though? Like, we know it's a joke, but there's still, like, a second to check in, and that never happens in canon. And I'm like, you know, we've seen now that Beast AU's come out, we've seen that Dazai will do it.
Oh, yeah,
so
we
I just
have.
don't care for the fact that it's so dismissed within the rest of the series, and so that's something that's kind of in my mind when I'm writing Dazai. And then just because this is a completely different world and we're dealing with a Mafia Dazai as opposed to an ADA Dazai, he has shit to do. He's busy and he has reasons to do it. And nobody's really going to take you seriously in the Yakuza if you're like, oh yeah, I just want to die.
Hi, I'm Dazai. I'm second in command here, and I really want to be dead today.
Yeah.
And everyone's like,
Yeah, because then, like, you know, when Dazai was in the Port Mafia, they just controlled the city. Like, you don't go around and be like, oh, you want to die, Port Mafia dude, here, bam, like, you'd get killed for it. But in this verse, the Mitsushima Gumi is very much in a headlock with the Nakahara Kai. So if Dazai's going around like, yeah, I'd rather die, you bet a Nakahara kid is going to try and take advantage of that.
Totally. Let's see. All right. So, there's this one line that Tria says of, I don't understand why you're Yakuza if you can't work with an organization. The amount of distrust that Dazai holds for literally everyone around him is made very, very stark by the fact that currently that's applying very little to Chuya. Can you talk a little bit about the fact that they sort of speak each other's languages here? Like, Dazai came into this kind of as an island of a man, and more he's finding that, like, he and Chuya, they speak the same language. They match on violence, but they also match on a sense of alienation from the people around them. They match on some frustration. Dazai with Shohei, Chuya with obviously everything about his ability being what made him unfit for his position. So can you just talk a little bit about the solidarity they're finding in each other there?
Well, it's interesting because they do mirror each other in a lot of ways. I would not call it solidarity, especially not from Dazai's perspective. What I would call it is Dazai knows Chuya's demons, or at least he thinks he does. And so Dazai knows how Chuya works. He thinks he does. Dazai feels like he knows what Chuya's motivation is. And so Chuya, the Nakahara Kai, is an organization that's much more traditional, as we've discussed, and it's very much more rooted in like the honor aspect of the Yakuza. So it's like, I, as a member of this family, this clan, I will die for this clan, and I will do anything to help it succeed, and I am 100% loyal to it to my last breath. Whereas Mori's running an organization where he's fostering conflict within it. And so Dazai's in a position where there's people around him that want his head, and he knows it, and he knows he has to fight to keep his spot. So Mori's just created this environment where you cannot trust people, and so you just have to report everything up because you don't know who else is going to handle it. And so Dazai is very much aware of that, and he knows that there's this environment in the organization, so there's that aspect as well. There's the mole that he hasn't been able to find that is clearly, to some degree, very knowledgeable about what he's been doing. And so it's really just an aspect of he knows it cannot be Chuya, and that's the only absolute he has right now.
Which makes a lot of sense given his kind of pragmatic approach to, like, the fact that he's a Yakuza. He kind of has to be pragmatic in some ways. It is life or death.
Yeah.
And so that does make sense, but the only logical person for him to put any trust in is, in fact, the other person who is so isolated within this organization, who he absolutely knows is not part of this.
Yeah.
And that's a very clever way to build that relationship, too. So we're getting to the fight scene. I know you love fight scenes.
I do love fight scenes.
I know you love Chuya fight scenes because Chuya is super fun.
He's a vamp. Yeah.
He sure is. And we finally get to see corruption. Mm-hmm. We also get to see, and this made me very happy, we also get to see Dazai kind of concerned with the fact that, like, Chuya could fucking die.
Yeah.
We see Dazai making the connection that with this power, Chuya could very easily leave him and was choosing not to. Mm. And we see Dazai going, hey, wait a minute, I don't want this moron to die.
Yeah.
I think Dazai got feels first.
I
don't
would
think
not
Dazai's
say
aware,
at this point anyone is emotionally invested. We just have to, like, everything that happens between them, especially towards the beginning half of the fic, really does need to be remembered in the light of their circumstances. So Dazai took the only blood member of the Nakahara Kai, and this person is married to him, he is in his care, and he's about to die in front of him, which would end the alliance and reignite the blood feud.
Wow, I read that entire chapter on Shipper Brain. So reframing that, it's a super good tactical move on Dazai's part to be scared shitless about your tiny
Yeah, well, I'm like, not even
husband.
is it that Chuya could die here, it's that Chuya could die saving Dazai after having more than once said this was a bad idea.
and Chuya is very good at calling the bad ideas. Yet again, another just a little nod to the fact that you very much established Chuya as being very clever. Like, we all think of Dazai as the tactical genius here, but Chuya is the one who was like, we need to get out of here.
Yeah, kind of from my standpoint, when it comes to looking at Sokoku as a partnership, what we get in canon in terms of that partnership is Dazai's the brain, Chuya's the brawn. Which is fine, but Chuya's an executive. Like, Mori's not making anyone an executive that can't be a thinker, especially as we've seen him as the acting head from recent chapters. So I'm like, there have to be brains in there somewhere. Like, you have to claw your way up to executive.
Under the hat.
Yeah, and so kind of the way when I first got into BSD, the way I adjusted that just for my own well-being is that Dazai is the pre-planner and Chuya is the in-the-moment thinker. So Dazai is so much better at coming up with all the plans, but, you know, in order to be a fighter, you have to think on your feet. So Chuya's really good at reacting to things in the moment.
Which makes sense. Dazai's filling the tactician role, and
Mm-hmm.
Chuya's more of the, like, on-the-ground, split-second, in the heat-of-the-moment decision-maker.
Yeah. And as I mentioned earlier, I absolutely do think Dazai is good at making in the heat of the moment decisions, but I just think by virtue of who Dazai is, he has to think it through just a little bit, whereas Chuya can just react immediately.
Which kind of makes sense, thinking about where she is coming from a very, like, physical fighting style, from very much training to, like, trust his instincts, trust his body, and Dazai kind of doesn't really have that. Like, he doesn't trust anything. And I mean, it's Dazai. You're not writing a meathead gym boy Dazai, so...
Yeah, and that's
Are
why...
you?
I'm not. But one of the things is that both in the restaurant and in this fight, Chuya's the one who makes the first move.
Yeah, that's true. And Dazai's also the one who kind of takes a backseat in combat. He sort of recognizes that his place is not getting in Chuya's way.
Yeah.
Which is also just a very nice thing to see their partnership falling together like that. And also, of course, with corruption and with the intense vulnerability that comes after it. So Chuya obviously is aware of what he's like post-corruption.
Yeah.
So him being willing to use it is, first of all, very much a mark of desperation, but also just really, really driving home the point that despite their circumstances and despite the fact that they might not have, like, actual feels involved currently, they are the only two people that they can rely on.
Yeah.
And I think that that was just a very poignant note to end that chapter on, because Chuya post-corruption is so vulnerable.
Yeah.
He's exhausted, he's defenseless, and it's Dazai. He can't use his ability against Dazai.
Yeah.
So just the trust of that kind of coming full circle from Dazai actually, at the beginning of the chapter, falling asleep around Chuya, and Chuya getting to see that side of Dazai. It kind of came full circle at the end, and we got to see a very exhausted Chuya, and I just thought that was a very interesting little kind of closing the loop.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, one more thing. This is pulling back a little bit.
Okay.
Hirotsu and Dazai, obviously in canon, they have a degree of closeness, even post-Port Mafia. They're on good terms. It's implied that Hirotsu's a little bit fatherly to Dazai in some very distant, very mafia-y ways. It seems like Hirotsu is, at first glance, almost taking a subtly similar role in this, just by way of their banter. Like, it feels like Hirotsu is rooting for Dazai, but in the same vein, Hirotsu is always kind of in the loop. And so I'm very suspicious of him.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we look at canon, Hirotsu's in this combat position. He's a black lizard, whereas in this story, he is a Kuman. Why did I say it like this? He's Gomen. I was like, let me just change it up, just for the hell of it. Which is not as much of an active role, and we've kind of seen him as, like, the one that Shohei's like, you're gonna deal with Dazai. It's like, and part of that is because they do get along.
And yeah, they have a rapport. They have, like, Hirotsu obviously is one of the people who isn't cowed by Dazai's reputation. And I find that very interesting.
Yeah, he's too old for that.
He is.
And that's why, like, Hirotsu's not a character that I really pay too much attention to in canon, but when the topic comes up, I find it very interesting that he survived this long.
Me too.
Like, he's the only person in the Port Mafia with gray hair, which I think says a lot.
I think so too. I mean, he's seen the Port Mafia since before Mori took over as boss.
He survived a lot.
He really did. Also, this is not related to this chapter at all. This is straight Bungo Stray Dogs. But can we just talk about Mori passing off the boss as having died from sickness? Can we just talk about the fact that that's hilarious?
Yeah.
Because that's really funny.
Yeah, I mean, because he's the doctor, so it would make sense.
I'm just... The shitpost in me can just imagine Mori coming out of that room going, just covered in blood, carrying a scalpel going, the boss has passed away due to sickness. I'm the boss now, any questions?
Yeah, that is an interesting point from Canon's standpoint because we know that nobody knows that Mori killed the boss except for Hirotsu figures it out.
And Dazai.
Well, yeah, Dazai was
Had to
there.
watch that.
Yeah, and so it's interesting because obviously we know Mori is very precise. So I'm of the opinion that he got no blood on himself, and that he made the cut specifically because he knew which way the artery blood was going to spray. And then he locked down the room, so nobody else was able to go in it afterwards. So what's always been interesting to me is what happened with the funeral. That's
Closed
always
casket.
the thing that gets me. Yeah, because I'm like, a closed casket funeral is what you do for someone with a horrible wound. But I'm like, he died of a disease. So how was Mori able to get away with a closed casket funeral when you have... there's so many things we don't know about the VSD world and about the Port Mafia in particular, which is really annoying because they've been there since like the beginning of the story. Because my next question is, were there executives before Mori was in charge? Because if there were, Mori should have had a much harder time ascending because there's 5 people sitting around that were like just below the boss going like, no, I need to double check this claim from the doctor.
I think there were. I want to say there were just because of 15 and what Mori was talking about dealing with like loyalists from a previous boss. Like I would imagine that would be his executive council.
Well, but I'm like, you can have loyalists in any degree because I just feel like if there were executives, if I were writing like Mori's ascent to power, they would have been dying out before the boss died, and it probably would have been, if I was Mori, I'm going to pretend I was Mori for a second, and then I need all of you to pretend that I'm not an evil genius. Because if I was Mori, what I would be doing was every time I went to attend the boss, I don't know why the hell they let him attend him alone, that's dumb. But I'd be like, it's really funny because I heard Executive A the other day saying X, Y, and Z, they get sent to the front line, they're dead. It's really interesting. I heard Executive B the other day. It was really just a great conversation. They're dead. And so having the boss kill off the executive council so that by the time he's dead, there's nobody there to question your ascent.
So you're basically saying that Mori essentially played the role of the advisor to the King of Rohan in Lord of the Rings, because I'm totally buying this.
Yeah, I guess.
I'm so on board for that. Yeah, he even looks about that snivelly. Well, I think that's what I've got.
Well, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about the scene with the courier.
Yes, okay, yeah. I did want to talk a little bit about that, because I specifically would like you to talk about... How to phrase this? It's the moral grayness of the characters. It's the fact that I think currently we're sort of living in a fandom attitude and a fandom climate of the fact that your protagonists and your heroes sort of have to be irreproachable. Like there's this sort of strange expectation that's come up that moral grayness isn't necessarily really in vogue currently. So can you talk a little bit about why you like it? And why you like to establish, like, why basically you can write a character and why you can write sympathetic characters that are also horrible people and that we are also periodically reminded are not good people?
I mean, I think what it boils down to is just this, when you get into fandom, you kind of, for the most part, become disconnected from other pieces of media, particularly books. Like, that's a common fandom experience is, I don't read books anymore because I just read fan fiction, which is like, that's me. I don't remember the last time I read a book. I tried to read a book a few months ago, and I was like, no, I'd rather read a fan fiction.
I think the last time I read a book was insert Jeopardy music here. Nope, that's not coming to me. It might have straight up been No Longer Human.
Yeah, and so for me, like, a little bit of this comes from what I mentioned probably way back in episode 1, in the sense that I was writing before I got involved in fandom, so like, I don't really care what fandom has to say about my writing. But one thing that's always interested me, and one thing that I think fandom has forgotten, is that protagonist is not synonymous to hero. So a protagonist means the person whose story we are reading from the standpoint of and who we are meant to be the most invested in. They're the main character in the story. That does not mean they are the hero. And so when you're learning those two differences way back in middle school or whatever, then you get told, like Dracula. Dracula is the bad guy, but he's the main character of the book. And so that's something for me that I've always found interesting as I was like growing up and reading, because I was like, you know what, I'm not reading any books where the protagonist is not the hero. And so I was like, well, I'm going to write one. And that's what my original story is about. The main character is a horrible human being. She's literally an assassin. And the only reason she's the protagonist is because there is someone in the story who is worse than she is. And that's going very, very far in the other direction. Like, that was literally for the purpose of pushing myself. But I think it's just something people need to remember is protagonist doesn't mean hero, doesn't mean they're the good guy. And in all honesty, I don't find goody two-shoes interesting as main characters. I find them interesting when they're in a story, like as a foil to a morally gray character, that sort of thing. If they're kind of if there's a bunch of bad people and they're like, wait, why are you all okay with this? I find that really interesting in a character. But I just don't want the people I'm reading to be perfect, because people are not perfect. And in my opinion, the only really good, like, morally upstanding character that I've seen in the last several years was Captain America, and that was only after the Russos got a hold of him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about it, Captain America was developed, like, his character was basically developed with the trope of him being, like, this perfect, outstanding...
Yeah, and so
like,
there's
Joss
this
Whedon's
interview of... I want to say it's the Russos, where they're like, Cap is really hard to write because the core tenet of his personality is that he always does the morally right thing. And so then the question is, like, how do you make that interesting? And that's by questioning what's morally right. And so he's going to be convicted in what he believes the right thing, but then you create circumstances where there could be more than one answer and put him in contention with the other person.
The actual comic Civil War event.
Yes.
I'm not bitter about the
I mean, they did that
parking lot
with the movie, but they did not do it well.
They made Tony's side completely not understandable. Like, they literally made it a one-sided issue. They were
what they did was and I mean, it was a tricky concept to pull off, especially with, like, the conditions you have with, like, Marvel being a cash cow, and that's what it's there for. But, yeah, and so that's one thing for me, and I mentioned it several chapters ago when I said one thing I think we lose in the BSD fandom is that these people are in a mafia, and there's this inherent darkness with it. And we get that really with Ryu the most, where he's just going around killing people, and so she's like, that's not good. And Ryu's like, I don't care.
I'm in the mafia.
Yeah, but that's honestly the most of what we see, because now they're kind of like comedic relief and side characters when we get into the arc. But since the Port Mafia is so prevalent from the beginning of the story, I feel like the fandom has normalized the fact that we have characters in the Mafia. And when I experienced when I was reading fanfic, I was like, you know what, I don't really get, like, the grit of the Mafia that you would expect. When I was writing my own stories, I was like, I don't really get that grit, except for the story where I was like, this story is going to be dark and gritty. So that's something that I really wanted to focus on at the story, is like, I want us to enjoy these characters and their dynamic, but I do not want the audience to forget that these are very, very dangerous people, and you probably don't want to be in the same room as them.
And personally, I think that makes them incredibly compelling to read.
Me too.
Because, I completely agree with the analysis. I'm super not into one-dimensional protagonists. I like even Captain America, he has darkness to him. Like, when you were saying he really did start getting good when the Russo brothers got their hands on him, because they started exploring his humanity. They started exploring those questions of what's like, moral versus what's legal.
Yeah, it's like, this is the reason why The Winter Soldier is just one of the best comic book movies of all time. It's because Steve he wanted to do the morally right thing and not catalog every person in the world, but the people he was in opposition with the exception of the plot twist at the end, genuinely believed they were doing the right thing for the greater good. And so it was a question of which greater good is right. And obviously Cap is the protagonist. And also there was a plot twist where the other people were being controlled by someone that just wanted to kill everyone. So that made it really easy by the end of the film. But that's how you make a goody two-shoe characters interesting. You make them have to fight to be good.
That really hit. that really hit. Oh god. Yeah, I need a minute on that one. Yeah, you're right. You put their goodness on trial. You make them fight for it, and I guess if you don't see the darkness, if you can't integrate it, you wind up watching a caricature.
Yeah.
You wind up with language cap, which
because I mean, like,
not down with.
There's all these sorts of people in the universe that have the best intentions, but even with the best intentions, you can't do the right thing all the time. It's just not possible.
Yeah.
So, why do we see them in fiction?
Completely agree.
Yeah. But kind of for me, with this scene is really interesting because obviously I wanted to do the darkness. I also had to find a way for Chuya to know what Dazai's ability was to make the corruption bit at the end work. Which is, I was like, oh yeah, I have an OC that would be perfect for that. Let's bring her back.
Press F to pay respects to Nellie Bly.
Yeah, and so there's a couple of different things I did in that scene to really point out I wouldn't even call it morally gray. Like, I would say they're mafia black.
I walked into that.
Yeah. And one of them is the fact that Chuya continued torturing this guy despite going, like, I don't think this is the right dude. And Tessa's like, no, keep going. And she was like, okay, whatever, it doesn't matter. I don't care. And then the fact that when he realized it wasn't the right dude, he's like, I'm done. It's your problem now. And was just able to sit there and think about all these other things while Dazai's torturing someone. And then for me, the big thing for me was the last bit of that scene where the boyfriend's like still alive and he's like, please let me get her to the hospital, I love her, and she was like, psh, and kills him.
Yeah, she was like, shut up, you're annoying.
Yeah.
That got me too.
Which is like, it really kind of drives the point home, like, you know, she dies and we don't really feel that bad because she's been working with enemy organization, but this was a complete innocent and a bystander.
Could you just torture her?
Yeah. And who could have, you know, been sent to the hospital, and they're like, nah.
But for mafia, they're not gonna do that.
Yeah.
And Chuya is not a good person.
Yeah.
So, anything for me?
Well, one thing I did want to talk about before we got to the questions was the corruption scene.
Yes.
And I had vaguely hinted about this in previous episodes. We're getting into the part where you're going to be like, yeah, so I said this vague thing 5 episodes ago. This is what I was talking about. So this is what I was talking about. And it's the fact that corruption is such an annoying thing as a fic writer because it's the trump card. It's literally designed as a trump card. And whenever you're writing a long format Sokoku fic, the question is, where's corruption? When is corruption coming in? Mm-hmm. And I'd written 2 stories now where corruption came in towards the end. There's one of those stories where it actually does have an appearance before the end, kind of like sort of in a midway point with a different experience. But when I was planning this story, one thing is like I do not want to make it the end-all be-all trump card. It's like I'd like it to have more of a purpose in the story than just being like, we're going to beat someone right now. And so I really liked the positioning of corruption here as a kind of impetus to another section of the story.
Okay. Yeah. That's a really interesting way to look at it.
Yeah. And another thing that I wanted to talk about with corruption is that it's not easy to write. Because, I mean, it's a really cool concept, but it's hard to adapt. And that's why we see people have issues with how the anime adapted it. Mm-hmm. They're like, this is ugly. This isn't what corruption is. It's because it's a little nebulous. Like, it's hard to get a hold of in terms of, like, the logicality of, like, so Chuya goes from being overpowered to being more overpowered. It's like, it's not like we're getting...
It's not like Deku from My Hero Academia.
Well, it's not like a Kent Clark where you're like, this guy is a complete normal and he's meek and he's scared of everything, and this guy can kill anyone. Chuya's just going from badass to more badass, which is like a harder jump to make epic to the degree that corruption is meant to be epic. And one way that I found makes corruption a lot easier to write is to never write it from Chuya's perspective. There has been, I would say 1.5 times where I started a corruption scene from Chuya's perspective, and it kind of cuts out. Because when Chuya is under corruption, he's not in control of his body. That's a lie. I did write one scene that I thought was really fun where it was from two people's perspectives. So it was Chuya's and someone else, and it was Chuya going like, I am locked in my body and I cannot control it, and that kind of like terror. But I've just found in terms of like making corruption really epic, it's so much easier to write it from someone else's perspective, especially if they don't see it coming. And really, one thing I just like really like about the scene is how Dazai goes like, that's Chuya, but that's not Chuya.
Yes. Yes, that identification was incredibly cool. I think that was really what differentiated Corruption Chuya from, like, normal overpowered Gravity Bomb Chuya.
Yeah.
Is that, like, Gravity Bomb Chuya, still a person.
Yeah.
Corruption Chuya, not identifiable as a human being.
Yeah, and it's like, Chuya, I would argue, has the most swag out of all the BSC characters. Like, this is a guy that just has a presence. Like, he shows up in the middle of a fight with, like, against 300 people. He's like, yeah, no problem. What do you have? Like, what do you want to have for lunch? I'll do this in, like, 10 minutes.
Between his entrances and his hat chain, I completely agree.
Like, he's just so confident, and so when he's fighting, he's pretty relaxed about it, and he's very, like, I would say he's very graceful when he comes as a fight, whereas Corruption is just completely animalistic.
It's very feral.
And I think that dichotomy is something that makes writing Corruption so much easier that a lot of people have a hard time articulating.
I think that was a really interesting way to put it into words, because, yeah, you're right. Corruption is essentially, Chuya has something non-human kind of shoved into that tiny body, and corruption is that thing taking over. And I think going back to some of what you said about it being difficult to write it from Chuya's perspective, so I have struggled writing corruption from Chuya's perspective. It's very interesting, combat is very interesting, but because corruption is something that, like, I am very firmly of the belief that if you're being locked out of your own body, especially if it's in a way that is, like, killing you, there's fear involved. And so it's hard to write, it's hard for it to look badass when you know what's going on with Chuya locked in that body. Yeah,
well, I think it really depends on the circumstances in which corruption's used. Because the time that I wrote from Chuya's perspective, it was his first time using corruption, so we had no idea what was going on. He just, like, out of nowhere, like, he couldn't control his body, which is, like, a very visceral, like, that's scary. Whereas, like, when we see Chuya use corruption in canon, Chuya's, like, making a conscious choice to lose control of himself, which I think makes it a little different and a little more difficult to write from that fear-based response because he knowingly walked into it. And so I think there's, like, that little, like, this is scary, but not scary enough for Chuya not to do it, that makes it harder to write from his perspective.
That actually kind of makes it even more badass, too.
Yeah. It's like Chuya's like, you know what? I could die. Let's go.
Chuya's attitude of, I could die, fuck it, let's do this, is really, really just very motivational.
Chuya just has so much swag. He really does.
He truly
He's
does.
Such a bam.
Truly, truly does. And he's tiny, so you know all of those clothes are very well tailored.
Yeah.
That swag is expensive. He has paid for it.
Yeah.
That hat is probably so expensive.
Probably.
Those things are not cheap. Just by the way, my Chuya hat from that cosplay is fake. It's not. It's not a proper hat of that style because they're all expensive.
Yeah. Let me see. There was just one thing that I like pointing out about this last scene is when they're sitting outside the car, and she's like, I think this is a bad idea, I think this is a bad idea, and Daz was like, what do you see? And he made Chuya analyze the whole thing, and that was kind of a section of me going like, Chuya's a combat person, but he's been a strategist for the last however many years since he got removed from the succession. So I really liked Tria explaining all that stuff, and I think this was an instance of going back to your question earlier of me just BSing how someone would notice. And Tria's like, yeah, it's weird because they're following every single law, even the ones that people don't know about.
That is incredibly suspicious.
Yeah.
I'm super not about it.
It's like Tria's like, why would you know all the laws if you don't want to get it? Like, if you don't want someone to look closer. I'm like, you know what, that does make sense. I don't know if that's how people work when they're doing illegal things, but I think it makes sense.
I mean, it's a logical train of thought to
Yeah.
follow, especially if you don't have a good frame of reference for how people act when we're being really, really illegal.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that was bad phrasing.
Yeah, so that was like my rule when it comes to fan fiction. If people were like, well, how do you prevent your characters from being OOC? I was like, it's no such thing. It's whether or not you've justified the choice. And so if they make a choice that's really weird, if you can justify it in the story, I'm gonna go like, okay, yeah, makes sense.
Basically, sell it to me.
Yeah.
Sell me your bullshit. Convince me that I'm buying flowers.
Yeah. Or just like make it
Make it
logical.
make sense.
Like, why did Dazai totally pick the wrong courier? Oh, because they're shape-shifting.
Which was logical.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess with all of that said, it's time for the Rika watch.
Time for a Rika watch.
I should get some music for the Rika watch.
We really should. Yeah, we need like some really epic music.
Yeah.
It's got to be like the final countdown here.
No. I'm not messing with copyrighted music.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Okay, so Rika watch. First of all, I'm still suspicious of Mori. He's still on Marika watch.
That's fair.
Every chapter, I'm waiting for Mori to pop up, do something slimy and suspicious, and fuck off.
He is a slimy and suspicious man.
He sure is. Let's see. Rika watch number 2 is Hirotsu, the mole. I mean, I guess technically a big Rika watch point that 2 could really be is who is the mole, but
Yeah.
Hirotsu is currently under my suspicion. So he's on there. 3, let's see. 8 chapters in, still no Yoshino sightings. Sounds suspicious to me.
That's true.
Let's see. Rika watch number 4. Very curious about your Dazai being less overtly suicidal now that you've said that there's a canon reason for it.
Yeah. Story canon.
Yeah. Well, yeah, yes. Clearly, Bungo canon is not justifying that. And let's see. It's less that I'm having a problem coming up with a point, and more that I have several, and I'm having trouble picking just one for Rika watch number 5. I did count this this week, right? This is 5.
Yeah.
Okay, so Rika watch number 5 is going to be.
This actually might be 4.
Can I count?
So 1 was...
1 was Mori.
Yeah, 2 was the mole.
2 was the mole.
3 was Yoshino.
3 was Yoshino. I guess this is 4.
Yeah.
I can't count. I can't freaking count. Okay. In that case, so Rika watch number 4 is gonna be, I want to see who else is gonna pop up on the Nakahara Kai side. I just want to see who else gets introduced. You're going both OC and like kind of feeding and filtering in a few canons here and there, so I'm just curious to see more of them and see who's on that side. And then let's see, 5. It's still very much in my mind, like, who Mori is holding over Dazai's head.
That is a charity project.
Yeah. Who is Dazai's charity project? And that's my Rika Watch.
Okay. Rika Watch over. I do just have a fun fact for you.
Fantastic.
That's literally probably mostly for you. So sorry, readers, listeners, viewers. I don't know what you are, people.
Humans.
Yeah, we don't know.
Friends,
We don't
Romans,
know who's
countrymen.
human.
That's true.
If there are any non-humans listening to this podcast,
Please take us away.
that I was going to say, from your standpoint about the OCs is, we've mentioned Rika and I roleplay together, and there's occasional need for us to pull random names out of nowhere, and 2 random names I pulled up are from this fic. One is Ishida, who we saw, well, we didn't see tortured, but it was heavily, it wasn't implied, he got tortured.
Ishida did get tortured.
And then Azumi showed up in this chapter, who was vivisected.
Oh, yeah.
Not in this story, but in a role play. Just like it didn't happen off screen. She doesn't get vivisected here.
Man, I feel like all of the random spatterings of our roleplayers are just things like, yeah, someone got vivisected last Sunday.
Yeah, it's a long story. But I cross-use OCs like nobody's business. I took 2 from Illustrations of Lying and put them in here. I took 2 from here and put them in roleplay stories. They're just everywhere.
I kind of do the same thing. I do cross-fandom. Most of my OCs come from my Mass Effect days. So if you ever see me using an OC, chances are they got their start as a Mass Effect OC. So
I don't cross-use OCs across fandom. I've never been in a fandom this long, though. So this is a new experience.
That's fair. How long have you been in Bungo?
I started writing for Bungo in 2016.
Nice.
So it's been 4 years because I started like January, February. So I probably missed my 4-year anniversary somewhere. I wouldn't really consider myself in the Bungo fandom anymore because I don't pay attention to anything and I hardly tweet about it. And every now and then I'll say something that's a meme. And then I ignore canon. It's like Ra's Day. I'm like, I'm offline all day. I don't want to be involved.
Oh, Ra's Day is, I haven't participated in a really long time, and I'm real happy about it.
Yeah, people just get so upset about it. I'm like, you know what? I'm just trying to have a good day.
I'm not here for the discourse.
Yeah.
I am here to troll the discourse, though.
I am too. Well, with that said, I think that's it for next week. If you've listened this far, thank you so much for listening. I'm not going to say whether or not we're going to have video next week. You're just going to have to wait and figure out, just like we're going to wait and figure out because we don't know either.
We literally decide the day of.
Yeah, we do. We're like, we're recording in an hour. What's happening? So, but if you do have any questions, next week is going to be only Chapter 9. Chapter 9 is one of our longer chapters. So if you have any questions about Chapter 9, feel free to send those to me on My Curious Cat. Leave them in the comments on YouTube or in the AO3 page. But yeah, with that said, thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you or see you, hopefully, next week.
Thank you for listens. Like, comment, subscribe.
Don't do that. We're not.
Don't do any of that. We're not those people.
I mean, you can do it, but we're not going to tell you.
We're not going to tell you. We're not going to be weird about it. We're not going to make you
Smash
smash that like button.
Okay.
Goodbye, gamers.